My name's Helen Christie. I'm a HR consultant with a franchise called Face to Face HR. And I've been doing that for about 4 years, but I've been 20 years in HR and people management, so I've got quite a lot of experience. I'm a chartered member of the CIPD, which is the network that kind of looks after personnel and development. And my background is in manufacturing, logistics, customer services, retail. So I've got quite a broad range of experience in different kind of people environments. Now what I do predominantly is support SMEs across the Northwest. So I would provide a HR service where businesses are probably a little bit too small to have a dedicated HR resource. That's my website down there at the bottom. We've got some great resources on there as well. I know, Rabina, you were saying you'd kind of looked at the government website. We've done our best to kind of summarise a lot of that stuff with kind of easier to digest information on our website. We've got a dedicated coronavirus resource centre on our website. So if you want to pop over there and have a look at that, it's all free stuff on there as well. So what I'm going to cover today is the job retention scheme, which is you've probably heard referred to as furlough, which I've heard pronounced a multitude of different ways. Furlough, furlough, furlong, furlough. It's furlough. It's a new concept. It's not an employment law concept that existed prior to this happening. So we'll have a look at that and what that means for employers. We'll have a look at the difference between self-isolating and shielding. So there's lots of different terminology that's kind of come into our vocabulary and vernacular over the last couple of weeks, and it's kind of just digesting what different things mean and what people are entitled to at those times. We'll have a quick look at self-employed options because many business owners or employers are self-employed themselves and can't necessarily access a job retention scheme for their own purposes. And then we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end. Okay. Right, job retention scheme, exciting stuff. So we've got this government scheme that they announced. So the Chancellor announced this about 3 weeks ago, and it's a scheme that employers can access that will allow you to reclaim 80% of a worker's wages from the government. And it's a grant, not a loan, so you won't have to pay it back. And it means that employers need to designate their workers as furloughed. Now, there's lots of kind of complications around it, and it's not just as clear cut as that as you would expect, but the main purpose of the scheme is to prevent you having to make your staff redundant. So it's not there just for the sake of it. It's not there just because you feel like furloughing people. It's there so if the only other option you would have had would be to close your business and make redundancies. So that's what it's aimed at preventing. So you'll be able to make these claims through the employer portal, and I know Rabina's already touched on it, but we will be I'll look at it again in a bit more detail, but that portal isn't actually open yet. So who is eligible for this job retention scheme? So there's a host of different people that are eligible for it. So your current staff are eligible where there's no longer work available. So if you have either got a downturn in your business or you've had to close your business fully because of the lockdown, it's likely that your current staff would be eligible for this scheme, but only if they were on your payroll on the 28th of February. That covers full-time staff, part-time, 0 hours, apprentices and fixed-term contracts. People that are working as agency workers can be covered as well, but they would be furloughed through their agency and not you as an employer. And that covers things like umbrella companies as well, so quite a lot of contractors set themselves up under umbrella companies ready for this big IR35 change that was coming in April. That's now been delayed until next year, but lots of people had already set themselves up under umbrella companies and they're covered as well, so they would be able to be furloughed by the umbrella company. So there's various different people that might well be absent from work at the moment. They would still be covered. So initially when the guidance came out a couple of weeks ago, it said these people that were shielding, and I'll touch on what shielding is, but it's essentially you've got to stay home for 12 weeks, you've had a notice off the NHS. So originally the government said that they were eligible for furlough. Now they've kind of slightly changed that and said they're eligible for furlough if they would be at risk of redundancy otherwise, so not just because they're shielding. The government have also now added in a section that talks about caring responsibilities. So if you are stuck for childcare, probably because you might, like lots of business owners, working from home and the kids are all off school and nursery and they've got to kind of try and balance working and looking after kids, they are now covered under this scheme as well. And it's quite broad, the bit about childcare in the guidance, because it's not really saying if the job was at risk, it's kind of just saying if you've got childcare responsibilities because of coronavirus, then you may well be covered under the furlough scheme. If you're on maternity or other family leave, you're covered by it if you come back to work and your job is at risk. So the key point is that you'd have to end the leave that you were already on. So if you're on maternity, you would have to give your normal period of notice to return to work. Returning to work, if your job's not available, that your employer would then be able to furlough you. Okay, hope it's all making good sense so far. I'm trying to summarise it rather than the thank you, Rabina. Okay. People who are off sick or self-isolating, although they can access the scheme, they can't have both types of leave at the same time. So you can't be on being paid SSP and furlough at the same time. So you would have to finish your self-isolation period, return to work, and then be furloughed. And the same with unpaid leave. So some people may have started before the scheme was fully put in place, perhaps gone on parental leave or something like that, where it's unpaid leave for various different reasons. And actually the better option would be for you to furlough them if there's no work available, so that they're eligible for it too. So there's this a bit of an unusual section with previous employees. You may well be able to furlough previous employees. So if you'd already made them redundant, or indeed they'd left for any reason, so if they'd resigned or you dismissed them, you could quite conceivably take them back on and furlough them. I would now I put that you can see in brackets there, I put a little asterisk, take advice first, because that makes me quite nervous as a HR professional, that if you've dismissed somebody or if you've terminated their employment within the first 2 years of their employment where there's limited risk, and then you take them back on and they end up with more than 2 years service, then you may not be in a position to dismiss them in the same manner at the end of it. So just be careful with that one. Okay. So I've had lots of questions about people who people who have just started with a business or are about to start, or they're about to start a new job, and what can they do? Are they eligible for this scheme? The answer pretty much is no, because you have to have been on the payroll by 28th of February. So there's a couple of options that you might want to look at as employers who have either made offers or have already started people. So you could potentially postpone somebody's start date. Now, obviously, as soon as you make an offer of employment to somebody, you've got an implied contract there. So you do need to, again, you need to be a little bit cautious with that, just because you've already got that implied contract. So if changing a start date is a bit of a breach of that. So the best thing to do in those circumstances is to have a chat with the person and seek agreement. You may well be able to withdraw the offer. Again, it could be classed as a breach of contract. So you need to have a look at what your normal contracts of employment would say in terms of notice, and either pay them a week's notice under statutory, or if your contract allows for it, in the statutory provisions actually allow you to not pay notice within the first month. So you're still within that first month and your contract doesn't say otherwise, you may well be able to get away with not paying them anything, but just double check what your paperwork says. If they've already started with you and they're not eligible for the furlough scheme because they weren't on your payroll, the other option, it sounds very harsh, but you've got, as business owners, you've got to manage your cash flow at this time. The other option is to dismiss them. Again, proceed with caution, just because there are, even within the first 2 years, there are certain circumstances in which tribunal claims can be made, but those are generally to do with discrimination or asserting a statutory right. So if none of those are an issue and it purely is just a cash flow reason and it's to do with what's happening at the moment, then you should be fairly safe to dismiss them in those circumstances. Okay. So what can you actually claim? So 80% of the monthly wage costs as at 28th of February. So that's important because the national minimum wage went up on the 1st of April. So what the government are allowing you to claim is what you were paying people on the 28th of February. It's a maximum, it's capped at £2,500. So obviously if you're paying somebody less than that, then that's what they'll get. But if you're paying somebody sort of £50,000 a year, it's capped at 2,500, the claim that you can make. You can also claim national insurance and pension contributions on top of it, but only kind of the statutory minimum. So they're not looking at covering additional voluntary contributions or anything like that. You can cover guaranteed or compulsory overtime on commission, but not things that are discretionary. So if you just kind of every now and again do a bit of overtime, that wouldn't be eligible. But something that was a contractual, you have to work one Saturday in 4 or something like that as overtime, then that would be eligible to be claimed back. Just some points to note, really, because there's lots of conflicting advice out there. There's lots of things that aren't super clear on the government websites, and they're open to interpretation, and actually in some points actually contradict each other on the website. So you can top up the salary to 100% as an employer. So you get this 80% back. If you want to top it up to 100%, you can, but there is absolutely no obligation to do so. If your workers' pay is variable, so where somebody perhaps was on a 0 hours contract and works different hours every week, you can look at making a kind of average pay claim. And that would be based on earnings from the same month of last year, or on kind of an average over the last 12 months. If you're paying 80% of the salary, in some cases that may take you below what the national minimum wage rate is. Now the government have been quite clear on that. That doesn't matter because they're not working, so it's fine if it takes you, the 80% takes you below minimum wage. It's not a problem. You can still do that because they're not working for you. It is subject to tax and NI and pension contributions as normal. So when you're paying your employees, they're going to get the tax and NI and the pension deducted as normal. So you can backdate the claim, so it's not just a case of everybody can backdate it to 1st of March, because you would have to be able to demonstrate that your work had stopped, or you'd actually laid people off. So for example, if your business had closed down on the 15th of March, you'd be able to demonstrate that your business had closed. You could backdate your claim to the 15th of March. If you've not closed it yet and it's obvious you're still working, then obviously that the HMRC are going to spot that. You have to put people into the scheme for a minimum of 3 weeks. Now the government initially were a bit vague about this, but they have clarified it now, and you can rotate people through this. So it might be that you've got 5 employees, you've got a downturn in work, so you've only got enough for 3 of them. You could put 2 of them on furlough leave for 3 weeks, bring them back after 3 weeks and put 2 others on furlough instead, and just keep rotating them through that, just to keep them all employed and kind of manage an average over the kind of loss of earnings between your team. One of the key things about furlough, and one of the things that I think the HMRC are going to kind of latch onto quite a lot, is that people can't work while they're on there. Now, work, in inverted commas, that means anything that generates revenue. So somebody rang me a couple of days ago and asked me, well, what about social media? If I'm talking to my employees on social media, what about that? Well, it's still work in essence. It's still work. They're still generating revenue. If you're cultivating relationships and developing things on social media with people, and that eventually turns into a sale, then it's revenue generating. So just be careful, because people are going to be able to see that and see that you've been working, and that will potentially mean that you have to pay the money back. So although they can't work, they can do some training. This is particularly relevant to apprentices. So if you've got an apprentice who is doing on-the-job training, and they've got to do 20% off-the-job training as well, they can still do that. And most of the apprenticeship providers are putting things in place to make sure that they can do that online, and they can do it in blocks rather than just 1 day a week. However, when they are training, you have to top them up to 100%, because you cannot take them below the minimum wage. They can volunteer, and they can, if they've already got a second job, they can carry on doing that and potentially be furloughed from 2 jobs at the same time. And what they've now added is that you can also get another job while you're furloughed. So for example, if Robina, if you had staff and you wanted to furlough them, they could go and get a job in Tesco stacking shelves to help out in the meantime, just to top up their earnings, basically. So actually employees could do fairly well out of this if they're able to get another job, so they'll be 80% of their original earnings and earning from somewhere else as well. Okay, so yeah, as I've just said, you don't have to furlough all your staff. You can just do some of them. There's no specific way that you need to select people for it, so it's not like a redundancy process where you've got to look at selection criteria or anything like that. Obviously, everything is kind of new to us. There's no kind of employment law precedents here, so we are quite expecting quite a lot of employment claims to come through after this. It might be that people challenge, why did I get furloughed and somebody else didn't? So as long as you're kind of demonstrating that you've considered, perhaps you might want to look at people who have got childcare responsibilities first. If you've got 5 people and you want to furlough 2 of them might be happy for that to happen because they've got childcare responsibilities. Talk to your teams, basically, communicate with people, involve them in the process. and you're less likely to get claims at the end of it. If your employees are able to work from home, then that's what they should be doing. So it's not necessarily that just because they can't work in the office, you can furlough them. If you can make other alternatives, and people are working on computers, we're all technology based these days. We're all sat here on this, probably in our own houses now, doing this kind of thing. If that's available to you, then that is what you should be doing. During furlough leave, people remain employed, so they've got continuity of service, they're still accruing service, they've still got all the statutory rights. So they still can claim SSP or maternity leave or all of the other stuff that they would normally be able to do. Any contractual benefits that they've got, so if you've got a company car, for example, under the contract, that would still be the case. And they do still accrue holiday. Now that is a bit of a kind of bone of contention for a lot of employers at the moment. So potentially you've got going to have your staff off for 3 months, accruing holiday, come back in June, and you've got 6 months left to take 12 months worth of holidays. So the government have put a couple of things in place to try and ease that burden for employers, really. So they've extended the time in which you can take your holidays. Normally, if you're only giving somebody statutory holidays under your contract, they have to take it within the 12 months. So the government have extended that under the working time regulations to allow a further 2 years for them to carry it over. So if you've got 5 days holiday left at the end of the year, you could carry it over for 2 years and still take it. Or the other option is to look at being a bit clever with your furlough leave and sort of putting people on potentially 3 weeks furlough as the minimum amount, and then giving them notice to take a week's holiday at the end of that. So then you'd probably have to pay them 100%. Again, that's not particularly clear on the government guidance, and we're hoping to put a bit of meat on the bones around that. It would have been nice if they'd have done it before 2 bank holidays, but they've not. So we're guessing that you're probably going to have to top them up to 100%. This is in this bit at the bottom is the big bold bit for you, Rabina. I guessed what your question was going to be. The portal isn't open, it's not in place yet. So if you are putting staff on furlough, you are going to have to fund this for yourself until such time as you can make the claims. And that's pretty important, because if your cash flow isn't there, then that's going to cause you a problem. So you perhaps need to look at other options if you haven't got the cash flow to fund it until the end of April. Okay. So how do you do it? How do you go about putting somebody on furlough? First of all, check your contracts. Lots of people have got layoff clauses depending on the type of industry that they're working in. If I've written your employment contract, you've probably got one, because my background is manufacturing and I put them in as standard anyway. If you've got it, you can invoke that and furlough people under that clause. If you've not got one of those, you need to seek agreement. It's not too difficult to get agreement in my experience so far. People are quite open to agreeing to going home and not putting themselves at risk and being at home on 80%. If and when you do it, you must you must make some kind of attempt to show that you're changing the terms and conditions. That doesn't mean you've got to issue a full contract, but it does mean you need to tell them what's happening, that the pay is going to be less, roughly how long it's going to be for, what happens at the end of it, whether they might get made redundant or not at the end of it, whether that's a potential. And you do have to keep those records for 5 years, and that's due to the fact that the HMRC are going to come out and audit people after. We're spending taxpayers' money, so they're going to want to know what you've done with it. So the claims made through the portal can be checked, they will be checked when you're putting them through by the HMRC for eligibility, and when they make the payments, they'll make them directly by backs into your bank account. So you'll do it in 3-week blocks, basically. So at the point that the portal opens, it may be that people have been on furlough for 3 to 6 weeks. So you'll make a claim then for the backdated stuff, and then you can make another claim every 3 weeks. Okay. Make sure you've got those records in place, whether you're getting signatures via email or whatever else you're doing. Make sure that you're keeping those records, because those are the things that the HMRC are going to audit to make sure that you've gone through the process properly. Just because you've done this in order to try and prevent redundancies, it doesn't mean that you won't need to consider redundancies when you come back. But in order to do that, you would have to have all the employees that are furloughed come back to work and then go through a full redundancy process as per normal statutory requirements. Okay. So as I said,
can I just ask 2 questions while we're just going on? there's originally two questions what I wanted from before. I didn't want it to stop. When you said, obviously, from 1st of April, the wages have gone, or 5th of April, we are still talking about last year's wage. Is that what the furlough is going to be paid on, or will it be on the new rate?
No, it'll be on the old one because the claims are being put through as whatever your payroll was at the 28th of February.
Right. Okay. So still on the old. Right.
So
Okay.
But the distinction there, Rabina, is that your claim will go through at that, but if you've got an employee training and you're topping them up, you must top them up to the current national minimum wage. So that's the difference.
Yeah. And right, what happens, because for the March month I've paid full.
Okay.
So when you're saying, is it going back to 15th of March on the furlough, or is it back to the 1st of March on furlough? What happens if we've already paid?
Have you closed your business, Rabina?
Yeah, the business has been closed from sort of about the second week in March.
Okay, so if your business closed from the second week in March, that's when you can backdate it to. So it's whatever date you stopped business or
Right.
furloughed your staff, that's the date that you can claim back to.
Right. Okay.
But it's capped at the 1st of March. So any time after, so whichever's the latest, 1st of March or the date that you actually closed.
Right. Okay. Right. Because I wasn't sure. So how would I actually do that if we've already paid them full salary? What do we do then?
Well, you'll just be able to claim 80% of that back.
Right. Okay. And then whatever I've already given the employees, so how do I pay them sort of less next month? I mean, obviously this isn't opening until the end of April.
Yeah.
So we'll still be paying them salary for the April.
Yeah. You would, again, you'd have to. That's where the writing to them comes in, Rabina. So you'd have to write to them to let them know that you were reducing the pay to 80% through the furlough scheme.
Right. Okay. And anything that's gone extra from last month, what happens with that?
Well, I mean, that you've paid them that already, so it'd be difficult to get it back off them at this point.
Right. Okay. You just that's fair enough.
Yeah.
Yep. Fair enough. Yep. Sorry, another question that sort of just came up.
Yeah.
Whatever the last bit we were talking about, I've just lost it. It'll come back to me.
I'll give you a chance to ask some more questions at the end, Rabina, anyway. Okay.
Thank you.
So there's a couple of things that we don't know yet. And either that's because we've got conflicting guidance, we've got Martin Lewis and the likes and his other people on Twitter and the internet kind of give different versions of advice, or the government just haven't clarified it yet. So it's quite important that we should be able to know whether people can take holidays and be on furlough at the same time, because lots of staff are already furloughed and we've got a bank holiday weekend coming up. The government are completely silent on this at the moment. So there's some indication from the HMRC Twitter feed, the customer service Twitter feed, that you can be on furlough leave and holiday at the same time. That's unusual because you can't normally be on two types of leave at the same time. And the concern is that if you have got to have a minimum 3-week period of furlough leave and then you break it with a holiday, that it could invalidate your claim. So I would say just until the government actually clarifies it properly on their website and gives a completely solid indication that you're able to do that, don't do it, or at least if you give people notice that you want them to take a holiday at the end of the 3 weeks and ask them to take it then, so that at least you're not breaking that first 3-week period and invalidating your claim. So they've added this stuff in about childcare. Now it's quite strangely worded. It's not worded the way that the rest of it is. It kind of says if you've got caring responsibilities, for example, looking after children, as a result of coronavirus, then you can be furloughed. In the general guidance for employees, where it's talking about childcare, it does not mention furlough, and it just says normal statutory leave. So there's conflicting guidance on the government's own website. So I expect that to be updated and a little bit more meat on the bones in due course, hopefully before people start doing it. But obviously that's the one that's causing employees the most problems, I think, because people are now coming to employees and asking to be furloughed because they're at home, working from home, and got children to look after and can't concentrate. But ultimately, it's the employer's decision as to whether they do that or not. So there's some questions around TUPE transfers. So where a business has been bought out by another business, or employees have transferred over to another business, and their payroll, they've gone on to a new payroll after the 28th of February, is that going to be, are they then going to be eligible under the new payroll? So there's some indication from this, an MP has tweeted out that they will be, that it'll be sorted, but again, not yet in the government guidance. There's also these situations that might occur for a lot of employers where you've started somebody, say, on the 20th of February, you've already run your payroll for February, so you've not put them on payroll until the beginning of till March for the March payroll. Will they be covered? Again, we don't know at this point. They've not signed that. And car allowance has been something that people have been asking about, because it's obviously a benefit that you're not using while you're locked in your house. You're not driving your car around. The government are silent on it. I had one of my own clients specifically asked me this quite early on in the process, and what the decision that we took was to agree with the staff. So we asked the staff if they would be happy to forgo their car allowance during this time, just to keep cash flow going, and while they were working from home, and they all agreed to it. So that's probably the better way to go about it until it's clarified. As I said at the beginning, there's lots of different terminology that's suddenly become into our everyday use. So I think things like self-isolating and shielding, and for an employer, it's quite important that you know what the difference is, just because there's different ways of treating it. And then when you add furlough leave on top of it, and all the other complications, it's perhaps just I thought it might be useful just to try and clarify what each section is. So self-isolation, and we'll have all heard about self-isolation, but from an employee point of view, if one of your employees has got symptoms of coronavirus, they must stay at home for 7 days, and that's the Public Health England advice. Now, for you as an employer, what that means is, in ordinary circumstances, if somebody came to work and wasn't well and they just wanted to carry on, you might let them do that. In this specific situation, you probably don't want them to, but because you've got a duty of care to your other staff, and it's a guidance from the government, you're perfectly at liberty to send them home as not fit for work and pay them SSP. So in the second scenario, if a member of your employee's household has got symptoms, they actually have to self-isolate for longer. So that the Public Health England are saying 14 days in that circumstance. So that's because they haven't yet developed symptoms, but they might, and then they might then have symptoms themselves for 7 days after that. And so that isolation period, when it's a member of your employee's family that's got symptoms, is 14 days. Again, they are entitled to SSP for that period, and the government have put something in place to allow for that SSP to kick in from day one. So in normal circumstances, SSP is not payable till the 4th day of your absence. So they've taken away that unpaid waiting day for illnesses or absences that are to do with coronavirus. And they've also allowed businesses with less than 250 staff to be able to completely reclaim 100% of that SSP for the 14-day period. If you have got a company sick pay scheme in place, then it's advisable for you to pay the company sick pay as normal for this self-isolation, even if the employee is not ill. If they've been advised by 111 or by the doctor to self-isolate, then it's advisable to pay them the normal sick pay. Okay, so they don't need a traditional sick note. So I think this is the part that's kind of getting a bit confusing for employers, really. So we're saying that we need, normally we would say we won't pay you SSP unless you've got a doctor's note. Now, obviously, people can't get into doctors to get doctor's notes. So the government are kind of instructing employers to be reasonable about this and not expect people to give them sick notes. If you're insistent that you need documentation, then you can't. The employees can get what's called an isolation notice from the 111 online service. But to be honest, I think you probably just have to accept that at some point people are going to be self-isolating, as we're all going to have it at some point. And to be honest, in my experience with employees, they're tending to be fairly honest about it, because they all realise at some point they probably are going to get it. So self-isolating when they've not got it, or no, just to swing the lead, is probably not. It's a bit counterproductive, really, because they are probably going to have to do it at some point. So if you're and I've seen this quite a few times, particularly where people are concerned about jobs or not getting paid or going on to SSP, refusing to follow the self-isolation guidelines. but as an employer, you have to remember you've got a duty of care to those other staff that you've got in the building. So if somebody comes into work coughing and spluttering, and you can't keep them at a safe distance from your other staff, it's not fair to the other staff, and you have to protect their health and safety. So it would be the right thing to do to send that person home as unfit to work and pay them SSP under the self-isolation guidelines. As a last resort, if they're still refusing, then you would have to consider a disciplinary action because it's a health and safety risk. I would say that is potentially, I'd threatened that before I actually did it, because in order for you to discipline, you'd have to have them in front of you, wouldn't you? So you probably don't want to do that. And it might be enough for you to just to say, look, this is getting beyond a joke now. We're going to take disciplinary action if you're not going to follow the guidelines.
Could I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
It is. If somebody falls sick while they're on furlough, does that take them out of furlough and onto SSP, or does it continue the furlough?
Good question. In theory, they should be telling you that they're sick, and then they would be entitled to SSP only. It's highly unlikely, Tim, that they're going to do that, because and I don't think that's one thing the HMRC probably won't be able to check. They'd be able to check if they were already on if at the point you furlough somebody they're already on sick for self-isolating, they would be expected to finish that period of self-isolation before you furloughed them. If they're already furloughed, they would have to actually advise you that they were sick, and it's unlikely they're going to do that unless you've got a company sick pay scheme paying them 100%.
Right, thank you.
Okay. So employees can return to work after self-isolation period, or be furloughed if there's no work available. So at the end of the self-isolation period, if you're open and you've got work available, the expectation is that they come back to work at that point. It's entirely feasible that people would have to self-isolate more than once, because you've a family member's had symptoms. If you haven't got them and then somebody else gets symptoms, or you get symptoms yourself, you might have to do that more than once. So shielding is something a little bit different. So shielding is for the extremely vulnerable. So the NHS have sent out, I think it's 1.5 million shielding notices to people who are most at risk. So that's people that have either got cancer or had cancer, organ transplants, people with severe respiratory conditions like COPD, rare diseases, or people who are just immunocompromised, basically, or not necessarily just pregnant people. Pregnant people aren't considered to be extremely vulnerable, but pregnant people with underlying health conditions like heart disease. These shielding notices, and I have seen them. One of my clients' employees shared it with me. They are quite kind of, you will stay at home, do not leave your house. The only thing they can do is open a window. Don't go shopping, don't do anything, do not leave your house for 12 weeks. So now in the original guidance, it kind of said that you could either you could be furloughed, or your partner looking after you could be furloughed if you had this shielding notice. That's now changed to say that the members of your household aren't covered by the shielding notice. They just have to stringently socially distance from you. So you could be in a position living with your partner, you're having to shield because you've got COPD, and your partner's got to stay 2 meters away from you at all times. But they are not necessarily restricted to staying in the house. I was talking, one of my best friends is an occupational health advisor, and she seems to think that's essentially for key workers, and they don't want to restrict key workers from having to be staying with vulnerable members of their family, really. The guidance originally said that you could just furlough these people that were shielding. Now they're saying you can only furlough them. You can furlough somebody who's had a shielding notice if you would otherwise have made them redundant, which makes it a bit more difficult. So I guess if you were furloughing half of your staff, for example, and 3 of them had shielding notices, you would choose those people first to furlough before you looked at anybody else, because they physically cannot come into work for 12 weeks. There are other options. You can look at whether they can work from home. So, I've got people that are shielding for clients that have got set computers at home and are still working. So it's not that they can't work, it's just that they're not able to leave the house. If you're not able to furlough them for whatever reason, they would be eligible for statutory sick pay or your company sick pay for the 12-week period, which obviously is going to put them a bit of a financial detriment, I should imagine, unless you can help them out with that. But it's not very likely for 3 months that you'd be able to top up the salary from SSP. Okay, so I have just put a couple of slides in about self-employed options, which is I think the poll said everybody was, sorry, Michaela, was it everybody was limited companies?
Yeah. It's good to know this though.
Yeah, we speak to a lot of self-employed people, and it is quite contentious. They feel a bit left out, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yeah, I mean the government have put some stuff in place, but it's I think most of us, and I'm self-employed myself, so I would class myself as that. We all reap the benefits of being self-employed and paying ourselves in a particular way, and that's biting us on the bum a bit now, I think. Okay, so can you furlough yourself as a self-employed person? Yes, if you're paid by PAYE. So if you pay through PAYE as an office holder, a salaried member of an LLP, if you're an agency worker under an umbrella company, or if you're a LIM-B worker, which is a dependent contractor, as long as you're paid by PAYE, under PAYE, you can furlough yourself. But most, myself included, I pay myself £719.33 a month through PAYE. So if I furloughed myself, I'd get £575, which is less than my mortgage payment. So it's not an option that I'm considering personally at the moment. And plus the fact, as soon as you do that, you can't work. So if you're running as a business owner and you're trying to just keep your business ticking over, a furlough is probably the last thing you want to do unless you completely can't work for whatever reason. Because 9 times out of 10, the business owners that I'm dealing with, where they are in these circumstances, they're furloughing their staff and doing the bare minimum to keep the business ticking over themselves. So they're doing their own social media, they're doing their own copywriting, they're doing their own whatever, because the staff are on furlough leave. So one of the other options that they put in place is for you to be able to claim universal credit. So for example, if you were ill due to coronavirus, that's not something you, obviously as a business owner, you haven't got access to SSP normally. So they put provision in place for you to be able to make a universal credit claim. And they've removed what's called the minimum income floor. Most of us aren't probably familiar with this terminology because we won't have made universal credit applications. But they will look at your assumed level of earning before they approve your claim, basically. So they've removed that so that basically you could have earned whatever and still get access to this £95.85 a week. Don't spend it all at once. SSP. You know, how many people would actually do that as a business owner, or whether they just kind of, you know, it's obviously better to furlough yourself than claim £95 a week, but I guess it's that's an option that's open to you. So the government then did put something else in place that is equivalent to the job retention scheme for self-employed people. This scheme is not going to be available until the end of June, to the start of June. So you'll be able to make back claims for it, but in the meantime, you're just kind of stuck really. So it's called the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. So it's aimed at mirroring the options that they put in place for employees. So you're going to be able to claim 80% of profits as a grant, capped at 2,500. So what they'll do is they'll look at your last 3 tax returns, or as many as been submitted, and calculate what your average profit is. It is a grant and not a loan, and you can carry on. That's the principal difference with this, because as a business owner, they recognise that you know, you're self-employed, you're quite possibly the only person in your business, and you would need to carry on working to keep your business going. So they've allowed for you to be able to keep your business going. And it looks likely that they will have that provision in place by the beginning of June, and again they'll allow you to back claim. So in the meantime, you're a bit stuck, I'm sure, but it does seem like they're doing the best to try and give us access to something. You must be able to demonstrate that you've lost profits to be able to be eligible for this scheme. So if for example in my case at this current time, I've got kind of most of my clients are retained clients, so they have me on a month-to-month basis and they pay me monthly, and that's still ticking over. So I would not be able to demonstrate that I'd lost profits as a result of it, so I wouldn't be eligible.
How do you best demonstrate?
I think you'd have to be able, you'd be demonstrating it through tax returns, and so when they come to audit you would have to demonstrate that from that tax return to that tax return you'd significantly lost income. Again, it would be, I think it's most likely to be post your claim, and what potentially that would mean you'd have to pay it back if they said, well, you've not lost profits.
I asked clients to put it in writing,
Yeah.
that they were going to pause, because even though I'm the same,
Yeah.
I've got retained, and the problem is that there's no point in having them retained if they can't pay.
Yeah.
And one of my clients is Italian in the north of Italy, so that was early on, sort of saying we can't afford this, we're going to put everything on hold.
Yeah.
I just wonder, so it is really, even though you lost those clients, if you did other work, you're still keeping
if you replace that income with something else, I think, a lot of it, Michaela, is going to be about good record keeping. So, as much as I'm saying to you, keep records of when you're furloughing stuff, if you're losing clients or you're losing, you're having some conflict, you're absolutely right. Get them to confirm that they need to pause, or they need to stop, or they need to cease the contract, or they've gone out of business by email. But ultimately, you'll be able to demonstrate it through your next tax return.
Okay.
So again, for eligibility purposes, you must have filed a tax return and have traded in the current tax year, and still be trading when you make the application. So if you've already gone out of business, tough basically. And your majority income must be from self-employment. So quite lots of people under self-employment may also have a subsidiary job role as well. As long as you're earning at least your earnings from self-employment and your profits are less than 50,000, then you are eligible for this scheme. Again, you as a business owner, you have to make a choice as to which avenue is best for you, and none of them may be. I mean, in my circumstances, I'm not going to use any of these schemes because I'm still working and I'm still earning. So as long as I'm doing that, I'm not going to be using the schemes. But there are other businesses who are not in as fortunate a position as I am and aren't able to function. So these things are in place to help those people. Okay.
Robina wants a question.
Yes, please.
Sorry, Robina.
Yes. Can I also ask what happens if you are an employee and also self-employed? Say if you've got rental income coming in.
Sorry, can you clarify that? I didn't really catch that, Robina.
Yeah,
sorry.
So how does it work? So if you are an employee and at the same time you're also self-employed, because you've rental income coming in.
Okay, so you'll be able to use this scheme if your self-employed income is more than 50% of your overall earnings. So if your rental income, for example, was only a quarter of your earnings, you wouldn't be eligible. If it was 60% of your earnings, then you would be.
Right. Okay. Fine.
So they'll look at the proportion of your normal everyday earnings and what proportion of that is down to self-employment and what proportion is down to your employment.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yep.
So there's a little bit of other help out there. So you can defer things like self-assessment income taxes. So if your tax year falls as mine did, I'd already paid mine when they made this announcement. So, but if your next back quarter, you can defer it. They've got this small business grant scheme in place, which is seems to be the most well received and actually the quickest to pay out of all the schemes that we've put in place. So the small business grant is where you, if you've got property or you run your business from a property and you're eligible for small business rate relief or rural rate relief or tapered relief, and you would know that if you were, because or your accountant would know that. You will get this one-off grant, again, grant not loan, of £10,000 from your local authority. So that's not coming through the HMRC or the government routes. So it's actually been a lot quicker to pay out. And a lot of people that are eligible for this are actually already receiving it. So this is what we were talking about earlier, Robina, in terms of whether or not you're eligible for one or two lots, depending on number of properties. And it just depends on the individual circumstances, really. But generally, if you are eligible, the local authorities have been very quick about it, and they're already contacting people that are eligible and making the payments. I know people that have received it already. They've also got this business interruption.
Helen,
Yeah.
On that one, if there are businesses who have branches around different authorities, so Manchester, Yorkshire, Lancashire.
Yeah.
Are they allowed to apply for each of those?
I wouldn't have thought so. I think the differentiation with the client that I had that managed to get two is one was registered as a limited company and one was registered as a sole trader. So if all of the properties are registered under the one company, I don't think they would get it more than once. But those are I guess an accountant is probably a better place to say that in terms of how your business is set up and where your properties are registered to under what circumstances, and whether or not you've got a small business rate relief. Okay. The other option is what's called a business interruption loan. So for small businesses, there's different things in place for larger businesses, but for a small business, you can claim up to 5 million for up to 6 years, and there's no interest payments on that for the first 12 months, and 80% of that loan is guaranteed by the government.
Can I ask a question about that, please, Helen?
Yes. Yeah.
If it's under £250,000, the banks are not supposed to be asking for personal guarantees, are they? But I believe that they are in many cases. I had a client yesterday that said that the bank was asking for a personal.
Yeah, I think it depends on the bank, to be honest, Tim. I've heard a few horror stories. I know of a company that went that there are 40 banks that the government have kind of working in partnership with, and they've asked them to be reasonable with people, but I think individual banks are not necessarily being so. Obviously, it would be a personal guarantee, I guess, on the other 20% that the government aren't guaranteeing, I suppose. But I know specifically Yorkshire Bank was brought up in a conversation yesterday that they had kind of refused this loan to a local business, and that local business has ended up going into liquidation as a result of it. So I don't necessarily think they're taking the risk as the government are asking them to.
No, it's all right when we were bailing them out.
Well, absolutely, yes. I think that's the general consensus in the business community, that the banks aren't really playing fair. But then I've heard other stories where people have managed to kind of line it up quite quickly, and it's all gone through quite smoothly. So I think it does depend on the individual bank.
Right, thank you.